Okay, but I see some more people are coming in. Meantime, we can slowly start and let people get themselves comfortable into the room. So good morning, everyone. My name is Emilia Dimoska. I'm working as a program officer with the Kvinna Foundation in North Macedonia. I bid a very warm welcome to all participants, speakers, and guests who took the time to join us today for this digital conference. We are really honored to have you, all of you, with us. Just before moving forward to the program, I'd like to share a few practical and technical information about the sessions today. So first of all, today's conference is also streamed on YouTube, and welcome everyone who also follow us on YouTube. For the people who are following on Zoom, the working language is English today officially, but there is an interpretation provided into Albanian, BHS, and Macedonian languages. You can find the interpretation button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. There is a little globe where you can actually select the language you prefer. And in case you cannot access the interpretation option, please make sure to have the latest Zoom application downloaded, or otherwise write to our tech support in the chat. And of course, if there are any other technical questions, they can be also directed to the tech support in the chat. Also, we may want to make some screenshots, mainly for Kvinna's internal use today. So for everyone who would like to join us in the photo, please keep your cameras on. Otherwise, you may feel free to be off. Feel free to have your camera off in case you don't want to be in the image because of any reason. So today is the third and the final day of the digital conference on feminist peace. In the last 2 days, we had some really interesting discussions with Kvinna partners and colleagues. And today, at the third day, we are opening to a larger audience. As I already mentioned, now today's session is also being streamed on our channel on YouTube. The initial idea to organize a Feminist Peace Conference came already last year, when we hoped to come together live this spring after several years apart, and to place focus on the important topic on feminist peace. The topic, however, is as urgent and as relevant as ever, so we are very, very happy to welcome you to this digital conference. The aim of the conference is to create space and amplify women's and feminist organizations' response to conflict, giving way to alternative narratives and solutions that the feminist peace movement offer. Hence, later on today, we will hear from feminists and peace activists at 2 different panels. But before that, I would like to give the floor to the Kvinna Secretary General, Petra Toterman-Ander. Petra, please.
Thank you very much. And a warm welcome to all of you who are tuning in on Zoom and listening on our YouTube channel. I want to welcome you to this conference with the title Feminist Peace, Alternative Narratives and Solutions in a Changing World. This conference offers an opportunity to hear and to learn about feminist peace, the power of feminist peace builders and their potential, but also, very important, their needs in today's complex political and conflict-ridden Western Balkan landscape. So the purpose is to provide a space for greater understanding of the alternatives that women and feminist activists and organizations offers, but also, as I said, what they need. Supporting women peace builders and women human rights defenders is at the very heart of the Kvinna Foundation. Today, we support over 150 women's rights organizations in 20 conflict-affected countries around the world. And since the 1990s, we actually turned 30 years next year, we have fought for the voices of women's rights activists to be heard in the rooms where decisions are made about people's lives and people's future, rooms from which women are way too often excluded. And this is why we, 22 years ago, performed one of the first ever gender analysis of a peace agreement. And this also became a contributing document to the negotiations resulting in UN Security Council Resolution 1325 in the year 2000. And since then, several Security Council resolutions have followed, and today they make up the so-called Women, Peace and Security agenda that we have today. And 20 years after the resolution 1325 was adopted, Kvinna did a study, which we called a right, not a gift, to assess the possibilities and the limitations of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And in performing this study, we interviewed 91 women peace builders. They were from Iraq, South Caucasus, Ukraine, Syria, and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And what came out very clearly from these interviews was that while the Women, Peace and Security agenda, as it is currently understood, is an important step for a more equal and peaceful world, it became very clear that the agenda as it is today is not enough. Much more is needed and more aspects needs to be taken into account. And we call it feminist peace, an approach to peace and security that seeks to address the root causes of structural violence and power inequalities, while simultaneously working towards gender equality. And that was a direct quote as we have formulated it in our newly adopted strategy for the Kvinna Foundation, staking out what we will do and what we will work on in the coming 6 years. Feminist peace requires key shifts in current paradigm, prioritizing inclusion of the now excluded majority, local ownership in diplomatic processes, and women's leadership in economic recovery efforts. During the past 2 decades, we have witnessed contradictory developments, both progress and setbacks. Women breaking glass ceilings in some areas and women being held back in others. And what we know is that when women's participations and rights are advancing, it is thanks to the tireless work of feminist movements, challenging power structures and not taking no for an answer. So in advancing the Women, Peace and Security agenda further, in a time of pushback on women's rights, increasing militarization and increasingly complex war, it is time to place women peace builder at the front and center and listen to their experience and knowledge. If we provide women peace builders with the conditions to meaningfully participate in peace processes, just imagine what they can achieve. So with those words, I would like to welcome you all dearly to this day of discussion, and I look forward to spending it together with you on these important topics. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Petra. And as you have already said, I really hope we will all use this space for learning and exchange on feminist peace today. So as I have mentioned earlier, we will have two panels today and a short break in between. The first panel of the day is focused on a growing threat to the advancement of gender equality and a broader feminist agenda, the anti-gender movement. We will now have the chance to hear prominent feminist activists Lana Bobic from Croatia and Irina Cvitkovic from North Macedonia, together with our colleague Eva Zilen, who is a senior advisor at Kvinna and who has done several studies on the anti-gender movement. Our colleagues will introduce us a bit to why the anti-gender movement represents a threat and what we can do about it. So I would like to hand over to my colleague Anna Daniels, who is moderating the first panel. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, so much for having me as the moderator for this amazing session. I am in awe of the amazing feminists and women human rights defenders that will be speaking after me. Before I give them the floor, however, I'd like to say a few words about why we are talking about anti-gender movements as a phenomenon, which is a global threat, essentially, as Emilia, you have already mentioned. And again, oh yes, one more point about questions. I think you, the audience, can post questions in the chat as well. And we will take this round a bit later. So in general, anti-gender narratives and movements have been on the rise continually. Continuously, it has been a phenomenon that has been growing, unfortunately, recently, and especially fueled by what is happening and what has been happening over the last few months around Ukraine and the war, as well as the COVID pandemic. These factors have really contributed to strengthening these narratives. The movements have, however, been gaining strength much before the war. And this has been the case across Europe, the Western Balkans, United States, also in terms of abortion, Central Asia and South Caucasus. This is a global phenomenon which has yielded increasingly organized and mobilized and coordinated and well-funded groups and narratives, which is frequently endorsed by larger forces and institutions, which we will speak about a bit later. And these groups and narratives in turn aim to obstruct and hamper the advancement of women's and feminist movements, LGBTQI rights, women's meaningful participation, both politically and socioeconomically, as well as economic justice and feminist peace by promoting so-called traditional, conservative, patriarchal, nationalist, and militarist rhetoric and strategies. And the narratives and the propaganda, especially also used by anti-gender movements, affect and pose a serious threat to the work and security of women and LGBTQI persons and organizations, initiative groups, and activists. Through attempting to control, curb, and limit their participation and access to decision-making fora and civic space, and thus affecting their efforts to build a democratic society on the premises of equality, human rights, and peace and justice. And my name is Anna Nemsitveridze, as Emilia also said. I sit in Tbilisi, represent the South Caucasus of the Kvinna Foundation. And in South Caucasus, the anti-gender movements have also been extremely and unfortunately very organized, very powerful. They stem from the patriarchal cultures, norms, and values that are very prevalent in this region. And then essentially, we are currently in July, which is Pride Month, and we are the groups, LGBTQI groups in Georgia especially, are preparing to host a Pride march, which we have already heard from prominent anti-gender groups, multiple threats that have been directed against LGBTQI persons and activists that work to protect their rights. In Azerbaijan, over the last several years, femicide rates have risen to an overly alarming rates based on these anti-gender phenomena and narratives. And in Armenia, for instance, many of our partners directly have been threatened, attacked, and affected both through online and offline threats. So this has been, unfortunately, a very global, as I said, phenomenon, also active in the South Caucasus. So our distinguished panelists, and I don't want to take too much time, will talk about in a bit about the root causes and the background of the anti-gender narratives and the ways the anti-gender movements narratives have been exhibiting themselves in the context of Croatia and North Macedonia, how women human rights defenders are personally affected by these narratives and the different dimensions to which they're affected, and what the consequences of the presence of these movements mean for women's and LGBTQI work, and also focusing on ways forward also. I think it's important, before I give the floor to our panelists, to mention that while we are also speaking about the counter narratives to the anti-gender narratives, we must ensure that the understanding here is that we strive to set our own agenda rather than be reactive. We strive to be proactive, and we strive to make sure that the women activists and the LGBTQI activists that we support and we work with have their own agency, and they advance to their own instruments, basically, rather than be reactive to the agenda that's being set by the anti-gender movements. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to my dear colleague, Eva Zilian, at this point, who is the senior advisor at Kvinna. She has worked with the issues of security for women human rights defenders for more or less 30 years in different shape or form, and that includes shrinking and closed space and the anti-gender movements. She's contributed to the amazing pieces of work that Petra has mentioned already, also that Kvinna has produced. So the first question to Eva is, if you, Eva, could please present the global overview of the anti-gender movements and the history behind these narratives. So thank you very much, and the floor goes to Eva.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna. Very happy to be here. Would have been lovely to have been with you all in Skopje, but this is second best, I guess. I think I'm going to start with just talking a little bit about how the anti-gender movement are affecting women human rights defenders globally. And I will repeat some of the things that Anna have already said, I think, but there you go. And then maybe we can dig deeper into how they have changed and so on, so that all of the panelists comes in. So I would say that, yeah, the anti-gender movement affects women human rights defenders and LGBTQI activists in every different way. And as Anna had mentioned, it is a long-lasting trend where anti-gender movement comes together with other anti-rights movement. You have the focus of the so-called traditional values, you have traditional religious leaders, and you have extremists of different kinds, including far-right movements that comes together with sort of attacking the gender ideology, as they call it. Many of them are also well connected with different authoritarian and repressive governments. And as Anna mentioned, and I think it's really, we need to be super clear, they have a specific goal, and it is to silence the women's movement, the feminist movement, the LGBTQI movement. So they are here to silence and discredit the ones that are working for change. And it is part, and some actually have said that, even if I said that they are silencing, they are also, it's this, when you are working to change power structures, you will meet with hatred in many ways. And this is what most of you who are listening now are doing. You are working to change power structures. And the people who do not want the power structures to change, they are the ones who are the resistance to that. It is part of what I would call the shrinking or closing space, not only for civil society as such, but particularly for women's rights and for LGBTQI people's rights. And I will just name a few things that I think are worth mentioning, and I think we will dig deeper into these as we go along in the panel. One of the things that we can see affecting is all the hate speech online. It's building this narrative against gender, maybe not even knowing what gender is, but that has been chosen, and that is because of the patriarchal society we are living in, most of us, all of us, I would say. And this can obviously also turn to offline violence. You have the slander campaigns, you have misinformation, and these are all things that are done to create mistrust towards the activists so that they don't have support. In the latest report that we wrote on women human rights defender security, solidarity is our only weapon, that came last year, the number 1 and 2 globally, the number 1 and 2 types of threats are harassment and smear campaigns and and false accusations. So it all goes along with what this narrative that the anti-gender movement and others have created are fueling into. A narrative of false accusation, and it can go as far as, you know, having false sex tapes about activists, but it's also this hatred that keeps sort of eating. It takes your energy, and it takes a lot of your power that you should use for something else, I would say. And I think this is also part of what we saw when we were looking at the threats, which this is part of, that the harassment is now so common for most activists, women human rights defender, LGBTQI activists, that they just consider it as a normal part of a working day. But it still takes energy. And that is important because that is a threat to the sustainability of the movement. It's a threat towards the individual activist because it can lead to burnout. But you also have the issue of money. They are well organized, the anti-gender movement. They are also well funded, whereas women's rights movement, feminist movement are not. So you have also that factor, and we need to make sure that the money goes in a different direction, and also maybe to look at where does the money come from that they are having the anti-gender movement. But you also have things like the anti-gender movement seems to come in and take over words. They are discrediting gender, for instance, and in some regions in the world, you can't really use it even in gender-based violence. And that becomes a problem again. It takes energy. How do we describe our work so it doesn't affect or threaten our possibility to do our work? They have gone into also using rights-based language, but if you really look at it, it's not really rights-based because they are talking about traditional rights, family rights, and you can all read the Declaration of Human Rights, you know, and see what are the rights that we should be talking about. I think in many ways the narrative on anti-gender influence everywhere, and I think it has been going on so long that some of the misinformation almost becomes true, and that makes it also more difficult to reach a feminist peace, I would say, to reach the fact that women should be sitting in places where this decision were made, and maybe even create new rooms where decisions should be taken rather than the ones that haven't worked that well. So I would say that these are a few of the things that I can see that the anti-gender movement are doing to the work we want to promote. And they are also taking some of the energy that makes, I would say that with all the false accusation, with all the misinformation, it has also contributed to fragmentization of the women's and the feminist movement, unfortunately. But we will come to the good parts with the sort of how we are fighting back a bit later. But thank you for now.
Thank you so much, Eva. A lot of the points that you have mentioned have, of course, resonated with me and with our region as well, especially in terms of discrediting both as civil society activists, women, and LGBTQI activists, but also women politicians, for example. We've had many a case, unfortunately, in Georgia again, where what, as you mentioned, also sex tapes have been used to discredit women's political aspirations for those who already have had established their presence in the political sphere. And this demonization, for instance, of the term gender, it's also very prevalent in Armenia, for example, where they have just recently, or a few years ago, adopted the first domestic violence law. And for instance, the Istanbul Convention itself was used by the anti-gender groups to counteract using the traditional patriarchal values as well. And then in terms of normalization of violence by women human rights defenders themselves, when they say, oh, that's okay, we've been attacked, but this is an everyday phenomenon for them. And this is something that we as also international community and donors have to acknowledge in terms of when we discuss funding and we negotiate funding options for women human rights defenders, to make sure that they have opportunities to address these issues to a larger extent. So again, and now I'd like to move on to another very distinguished and amazing panelist that we have with us. This is Lana Bobic from Croatia. She's a feminist theologian. Like, to me, this is an excellent introduction. She is an activist who has been active in advocating and campaigning for women's rights and opposing the anti-gender attacks on women's rights and deconstructing both the religious and secular sexist, chauvinist, and misogynistic discourses. So I would like to give the floor to you, Lana, and ask, how do you and how do your fellow sisters and activists deal with the anti-gender movements and narratives in Croatia? Thank you, sir.
First of all, thank you for the call to participate in this conference. It's a privilege. How do we cope with anti-gender movements? Well, that changes with the time, to be honest. Our first reaction to the anti-gender movement, although it wasn't called anti-gender movement back then, was in 2012 when they were attacking the sexual education that was proposed for schools. They were connecting comprehensive sexual education with putting pedophilia into school. And in that moment, when it just emerged, we were actually shocked. And I don't think that we had a good response, because we were shocked with what we're hearing. We actually couldn't believe what is happening here. But they did work their way, and they started to tackle a lot of different issues. It's always attacking sexual education, gender equality, women's rights with accent on reproductive rights, LGBTIQ rights, and last but not least, very important to understand, if we want to understand the anti-gender movement, what they're actually attacking is liberal democracy. And this took a lot of time for us to understand, because we were very orientated in this particular attacks that they were doing. We had huge attacks on women's reproductive rights in Croatia. And although the law in Croatia is like that you cannot ban abortion, they're actually making the abortion unavailable. What we have lately is, not lately, through last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, we have clericalization of gynecology. And just to give you an example of what I'm saying, is that I will share a picture with you. And this is a picture that one satirical page made a few years ago when the bishops held conference about gynecology and obstetrics in Croatia. When I say that they make abortion unavailable, I mean that most of the doctors in Croatia are in consciousness objection and they're not doing abortion. So although it is legal and cannot be banned, it is in a big way unavailable. And also they are using this discourse that Eva talked about, hate discourse, calling people killers, and making the narrative about life starting with conception. This is the narrative that they are building. It's not only in Croatia, it's in Poland and everywhere. And unfortunately, although it is legal in Croatia and the law is itself good, we have to tackle with these problems. The moment when they were most seen as anti-gender movement, and when we actually started to use this terminology because we had research that actually researched this movement on a global level, is during the process of ratification of Istanbul Convention, when we had a huge backlash. And back then they were actually using transphobia to attack gender equality, stating that actually gender ideology is something that is promoted by Istanbul Convention and is something that will make our children decide what they want to be. They understand that they create discourse about LGBTIQ people as a tendency, as a choice, not as an orientation or gender identity. And we used a lot of energy. It really took a lot of energy. For me, it was 2 years constant campaigning, deconstructing this very harmful discourse, explaining, educating people what the gender means, what gender equality means, why it is important to understand violence against women as gender-based violence, because the term gender, as Anna said, became totally demonized. And it took so much energy that while this process, we had no time to talk about the implementation of the convention. Okay, we ratified the convention. It is still not implemented. And worst thing is that I thought that we actually had this anti-gender movement, you know, we beat them. We did not. Few years later, I still see that gender is being demonized in society. And there was this case a few days ago, it was horrendous. There is this great organization that got a program to teach about gender equality and deconstructing gender stereotypes in kindergartens. The backlash that they had from the public with the idea that this is gender ideology that is going to bring pedophilia, that is going to bring all sorts of stuff, was just horrendous. I couldn't believe that, and I couldn't believe that this movement is still so strong and so much opposing on gender equality. And for me, this is shocking, but others need to talk to, and we will come back to some of the strategies later. What I want, there is one more thing that I want to say that I think that it's really important, if not crucial, is what I already said, and that is they're not attacking only women's rights, they're not attacking only LGBTIQ rights, they're attacking liberal democracies. And this is the core, and this is what we have to understand if we don't want to approach this movements reactively, but proactively. Also, it is seen from how they're financed. Eva said a little bit about that. They're very well funded. They're funded both by Russian oligarchs and by USA conservatives. So this is a mishmash group that is not based on ideological strain in a social sense, but more economic sense. What the European Parliamentary Forum in their population and development, in their tip of the iceberg religious extremist funding against human rights said, that this is a hyper-capitalist economic project, which is corporate and pro-welfare agenda, which uses refeudalization against regulated market economy, and it's illiberal political project. Its goal is to obtain illiberal democracies.
Thank you, Lana, so much for your points. And they really, really, again, strike hard into the heart of what is also now happening, and it really reverberates in terms of what is really currently going on. And as we speak, actually today, we in Georgia, again, for instance, I'd like to go back to that. Georgia is currently in the process of awaiting this accession or candidacy status from the EU. And this is a prime opportunity to advance what Lana has said in terms of liberal democracy values. Because also, and I know this is the case for many of your contexts as well as South Caucasus, is that the LGBTQI issues and gender are seen as Western concepts that have been brought in to corrupt the traditional minds of and values of our local societies. For instance, while Russia is frequently seen as this orthodox big brother that many of the anti-gender movements try to access to. So this is a really crucial moment right now. So a lot of what you have said is extremely relevant to what is happening today. For instance, one point that you also highlighted is education. And this is obviously something that needs to be enhanced and accessed to make sure that the new generations do not grow up with the same values and restrictive thinking that many of our compatriots are embracing currently. However, sex education across the South Caucasus is not at all a thing anywhere. And it has been very much opposed, obviously, by the Orthodox Church, first and foremost, as well as other super traditional groups. And then when it comes to legislation, this is also really, really important, for instance, in terms of anti-discrimination laws. In Georgia, we have one, but it is completely devoid of any enforcement mechanisms because the church was present when they were discussing it in the room. And so they really opposed inclusion of sexual orientation and gender identity as grounds for discrimination. And so in order to appease the church, the government decided to strip this mechanism of any enforcement tools. In Armenia and in Azerbaijan, unfortunately, there is no such law at all, and queer activists and community members, as well as other people who have been subject to discrimination, do not have any legal means to seek redress. And so this is a very, very, all of your points that you have highlighted, Lana, are extremely relevant also for the South Caucasus context. And then we move on to a different context of North Macedonia by giving word to another amazing feminist activist, feminist and queer activists, active in research and advocacy, currently working on creating adequate responses to the rise of the anti-gender movement in North Macedonia. And so, and the same question goes to you, Irena Cvetkovic, actually. How do LGBTQI women, human rights defenders, and feminist activists, such as yourself, counter and work to dismantle the anti-gender movement in Macedonia? Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Thank you, Anna, and thanks to all of you present on this panel. For me also, it is a pleasure to talk on these issues. I would like first to maybe just give you a short examples on, because the situation in Croatia and North Macedonia are very similar, just to show how this is, how these movements have affected us. Just to put it very simple, and then we can move on to what are we doing within this problem. So first to say that it has destroyed most of the advocacy initiatives and policy reforms that we have been advocating for in our country. Second, it has ruined our public image as civil society organizations. And it started creating gaps between the women and LGBTI movement. And of course, it has affected us as activists personally. So, let's get back to the question. First, we as coalition margins distinguish between, on one side, the ideological views of the traditionally conservative part of the society, whose views on feminism and LGBTI rights have been negative and still are negative. And on the other side is the anti-gender movement. So the anti-gender movements are an international or transnational movement that opposes what they call a gender ideology or gender theory. And one of the key researchers of the anti-gender movement, Professor Alexandra Peto, actually excludes the definition of anti-gender movements as classic anti-feminist initiative and defines them as a fundamentally new phenomenon that has been launched to create a new world order. So let's get back to what Lana said. Yes, they are attacking liberal democracy in a nutshell. And coming from an organization that has very clear leftist political position, we are also very critical towards liberal democracy and the concept of neoliberalism. However, we cannot find any common language with these movements because, as Lan already said, their solution to this problem is illiberal democracy, and our solution is more just and equal world. In North Macedonia, there are different groups and organizations within the anti-gender movement, and they are now joining together in one big coalition called Coalition for Protection of Kids. So although they are different groups and people, what unites the anti-gender actors is the ability to push different discourses into one great threat and construct the term gender or gender ideology as an attack on at least one of the three ends that the actors claim to defend. So the nature, the nation, and the normality. So now you have a threat on one side and object of love, like the nation, the nature, and normality that you need to defend on the other side. So it is very clear on which side are the women human rights defenders. So with this in mind, these movements have affected the feminist movement and civil society in a very harsh manner. So first of all, ruining our public image by representing several civil society organizations as problematic, not the whole civil society. What Eva said, to silence and discredit, this is where they put their most effort. So in our country, these organizations are the ones working on feminist issues, sexual and reproductive health and rights, LGBTI organizations, and organizations working with marginalized communities. The result of this is the division within civil society. So you have the good NGOs and the bad NGOs. And this is different than the gongos, the phenomenon of gongos that we are all aware of for a certain amount of time. Gongos are affiliated with governments. They are government-installed NGOs. But this narrative creates image that some civil society organizations work for the people and some civil society organizations work against the people. And this contributes a lot to the shrinking space for civil society. Then the personal attacks on people from these organizations. Of course, they will attack certain organizations with names, but then they will choose a person within that organization. So to select the black sheep. And every second day, I'm on their social media channels with photo or video. And this is how they, I can show you just from yesterday, actually. Just a second, I need this to be. So how can I? Okay. So what they do is they will select a person, and this is me. Yeah. So they will select a person, and then they will manipulate over, for example, my interview. Well, I was saying that in this interview, I was saying that hate speech should be somehow sanctioned. And they will say that I'm imposing prison for everyone that doesn't think as themselves. And they will show some examples from some feminists from Norway who is facing imprisonment because she said that trans women are not women. And I'm sure that this is not really the case. However, it's just manipulation. So when you have this, how to say, the black sheep, what you do is that so the enemy of the people now has a name and a face. The other thing is to spread fake news and misinformation on our work. So once the lie is out there in the public, it is very hard to defend the truth. However, and this is how we are trying to, cope with these things. HERA, one organization, have filed a petition for slander against one anti-gender organization and won the case in civil court. And I think this is very important decision of the court. This is how actually we prove to the public that this organization is lying. And another organization, Subversive Front, have filed a petition for discrimination against one of their spokesperson, and also won the case. And this is how we show that their rhetorics are discriminatory. However, due to the work of these movements, we lost two major reforms that we were advocating for more than 10 years. One is the educational reform, very similar case to Croatia, which included gender-sensitive education or promotion of gender equality through education and introduction of comprehensive sexuality education. So this is one reform that we lost. And the second one is the legal gender recognition, the law on legal gender recognition that will allow transgender people to have documents that are aligned with their gender expression and their gender identity. The laws, we managed more than 10 years, we were working on this. We managed to put them in the parliament to have all political parties more or less agree. And then they are now revoked from the parliament as a result from this paranoia that was created. And later I might talk why their strategies are more effective than ours, and just one letter from this organization diminish 10 years of work of a serious organization.
Thank you, Irena, so much. Once again, a lot of your points are extremely relevant to the current context, to the historical context of the anti-gender movements globally, as well as and also in the other contexts, such as, again, the South Caucasus, because essentially what you said about just recently, starting from this last point on legal gender recognition, this has been a subject of contention in Georgia, especially where many, or at least several of our partner organizations have been working previously with the local authorities to decouple, because in Georgia we have this prerequisite to undergo the sex reassignment surgery for people to have documents issued. I'm sure that's the case also in your context. And so to attract, and what I'm saying also this because I'm also coming from a background of civil society organizations and working with similar organizations previously in the past, and there is a trend of diminishing attention from the authorities to embrace this or even discuss this subject at all. Because of the influence of the anti-gender narratives generally, there is a large shift in terms of participation from the local authorities to hear about these issues at all. So over the past 5 years, we have come to a point, or we have regressed to a point where they do not want to come to dialogue at all. The manipulation and propaganda issue is also, and fake news is also a very well utilized tool by the anti-gender groups in our contexts as well. to discredit human rights defenders. Gongos is a really big point in the South Caucasus, especially in the more restrictive settings, and that comes because of certain legislation that restricts NGO operations. However, this really contributes to strengthening the anti-gender phenomena and the shrinking space, as you have said also very correctly. And hence, in terms of the need for safe spaces for women human rights defenders and LGBTQI activists to come together and to exchange on trauma and healing practices, for instance, but also to strategize and organize together. And then one more really important and very interesting point in terms of historical perspectives. For instance, in Georgia, the anti-gender and homo-transphobic movements have a longer history than the LGBTQI gatherings themselves, because the first such gathering or celebration of the Idaho event on May 17th took place in Georgia in 2011 or 12, I think 11, but there were huge rallies that were homophobic and transphobic and supported by the anti-gender narratives that were several years in advance of that, because of this propagandist notion that the West is basically bringing in these narratives and trying to, again, corrupt the traditional values. So this is a very funny but unfortunate event. So now, again, we would like to, and again, thank you to all three of you for such really important reflections and points. And now I have another set of questions actually for all of you, and really kind of moving on to the, again, the strategies. And I think Eva will also speak in a bit about what the change has been, also historically coming from the early 2000s to later. But this is, we would like to hear maybe from all of you in terms of how you as feminist activists, queer activists, have been affected as organizations and activists, again, and human rights defenders by these movements. So this is something that we would like these questions to Lana and Irena. And I guess Lana first, if you could take this, and then we can move on to Irena and then Eva.
Well, we're affected in a way that we, as Eva said in the beginning, we don't have time to work on the issues that we should be working on because we need to react to this. And when I say this is something equally someone saying that the earth is flat. So this is what I have to fight, and it is exhausting. And I mean, you all said the strategies that they're using, you came across them, but they are really brutally organized when you look at their strategies. The gender ideology is nothing else than a construct to raise a moral panic, you know, and that is their tool. And they're always acting like this concerned citizens that are saving the society, like they're from the, like they're grassroots movements, although the movement always comes from above. And in order to make sense of defending something, you have to portray something as being attacked. And for them, that is motherhood, fatherhood, with mother being home carrier and, you know, traditional understanding on motherhood, fatherhood, it's family, it's tradition, and of course it's religion, and it's even homeland. Like in Croatia, they are very much attached with Roman Catholic Church. In some country where the Orthodox Church is dominant, they will be attached to the Orthodox Church. They're constantly establishing new organization, new websites, new, so to say, movements. And as you said, fake news, it's more than fake news what they're producing. They're combining partial facts with fictional constructions, and then they shape them in this common sense claims that are repeatedly repeated to turn into mobilizing truths. This is a mechanism they use. Very important, and I'm really happy with Irena mentioning the lawsuit they did against one of them, because this is crucial for us within our strategies. One of their strategies are lobbying, litigation, election mobilization, litigation, and so on. I don't know if there is an activist or organization or who hadn't been sued by these parties, whether it is because of whatever, defamation or religious freedom rights or this or that. But they're also making election mobilization. They're also establishing political parties and infiltrating institutionally, which is also very, very much dangerous, because in Croatia right now, we have them in all, not only in institutions on a high level, we have them in all school boards. So when you try to organize gender equality education, which you have to do according to international documents, including Istanbul Convention, you will have a backlash from a school board that is infiltrated with these people. As someone also said, Eva was talking about this hate speech on the internet, and that is also this mechanism that they're actually leveraging conflict-oriented media culture to increase visibility and growth, as was also use of affirmative language to human rights discourse. I will again just a second show you something. So they're always fighting for something, and they're using human rights language. They're fighting for family. They're fighting for life, which always makes you the opposition. So you're anti-family, you're anti-life, you know, and fighting for them, that they're actually fighting against gender ideology and ideological colonization, making it the culture war. What I'm angry about is that understanding all of these mechanisms took us some time. We had to do the research. We had to research their discourse. We had to research where they come from, or when did it started, etc., etc. And then I will talk about our mistakes that I believe are our mistakes, because I think that is crucial. Then we had so much energy put into deconstructing the discourse. And I don't think it is a mistake, because in one way it is necessary, but you won't deconstruct this discourse to everyone. People who believe in gender ideology will believe in gender ideology, and I can talk about gender equality and try to educate them, it won't go. What I think is crucial is what was said about suing them. So you're going to write lies, fake news, lies about us, our organization, we are going to sue you. Now we are organizing in a way that we will be offering financial resources to women who couldn't have abortion in Croatia because it wasn't unavailable. You couldn't? Okay, and we're ready to go to the Human Rights Court, because we know we have a case. And now we are raising money for this kinds of legal battles, because this, I think, is the only way that we can win, because constantly getting into discussion with them about gender ideology, it's crazy, it's going nowhere. So being very practical. And for me, what is the most important thing is to be proactive. I'm not even listening to them anymore. We are being proactive. What I mean, in 2012, we had a huge backlash to gender equality programs and comprehensive sexual education in school, as I already said, saying that they're putting pedophilia in the school and so on and so on. 2 years ago, we actually made a petition for comprehensive sexual education in school. And we knew that there was no chance that we were getting this as an obligatory subject in the school, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was to change the discourse, because it was so inflicted with these ideas about which they input in the public sphere. We just wanted to change the discourse, to educate people what comprehensive sexual education really means, how this is good for young people, how this affects young people. Also, researches were done amongst parents and amongst high school people. Would they like sexual education in school? And most of them, both parents and children, said yes. And here we had the strength because they were saying they're talking in the name of the people. And we had the strength to say, no, you're not talking in the name of the people, because 80% of the people, both parents and both high school students, want comprehensive sexual education in school. You're just being a very loud minority. So these are the strategies that I think we went on through. And I mean, it's been hard coming from this place to this place. We changed, but it's been hard mostly in losing a lot of energy, being demonized in public, as Irena said. I mean, in Croatia, we have this, I can also show you this. So when you're a feminist, then they have this page, and then they put you on this page, like, who is feminist Lana Bobic? They put wrong, totally off picture, and then they totally turn around what you said, totally demonizing you as you're some kind of ambassador of the culture of death, etc., etc. And it is really not a good position, and it takes a lot of energy from activists, but also civil society organizations that have to fight this all the way. So I think now that we understand how they operate, I think it's crucially that we also change the way that we are operating, not letting them drain our energy, but being very proactive, being very strategical, winning legal battles, because we have all the international documents on our side. We have amazing tools we can use in international documents, and we need to start using them seriously and not using all our energy in these discourse changes that are just not going to happen.
Absolutely, Lana. This is again some of this rhetoric that I'm hearing from our partners here, saying that we are the ones and they are the ones that will be setting the agenda and claiming or reclaiming their agency in this struggle. And then I think, and then we have a very interesting reflection from one of the participants likening this to what is currently happening in the US. And I also have to agree with that. This is very, very unfortunate. Even though we don't have this harmful administration in place currently, the fallout from it will unfortunately continue for many, many years to come. For instance, this incel movement has again surfaced itself, and these current deliberations around abortion and restrictions on federal level, these are extremely alarming. And one very interesting thing that you said also earlier in your points was that in terms of the gender ideology and these groups also reverting and using human rights language. And these are the most dangerous ones, essentially, because they speak in a very eloquent way, and they have a lot of potential to attract a larger following, aside from, let's quote unquote, the crazies, who a lot of the society will also marginalize. So it is a very, very important point in terms of following and also making sure to set the agenda in the correct point. So now moving on to Irena, if you could also speak about some of the strategies, even though I know a lot of it is very similar, and it's very difficult to differentiate by context, but in terms of what are some of the strategies that these groups have been using in the North Macedonia context? It will be super interesting to hear from you as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let me add to some things that was previously said, and great comment. I think is really important to understand that this is a global phenomenon. So generally speaking, what they are using worldwide is actually well known and now even more productive strategies of the right-wing populism. So the right-wing populism relies on this polarization between the ordinary people and the elites, the ordinary people who are attacked by the elite NGO governments, Western governments, etc. And centuries of political science and philosophy has taught us that the phrase ordinary people contains a history of political and social relations that put actually certain groups of people in a position of privilege to define what ordinary people means and who are ordinary people. So let's ask ourselves, who are the common people? Who are the ordinary people? Are they a construct of the populist narratives, or we are talking about some real community of real people? But however, the majority of the citizens usually doesn't bother with such questions. So this is the reason why their strategies are very productive. So they represent them as parents, as ordinary people, versus us as NGOs. And this has several impacts. So traditionally, people do not trust civil society in North Macedonia. It is another topic, I'm not going to go into it, but our negative image, and I think even in the Western Balkans, is mostly created by corrupted governments, politicians, and we are portrayed as money launderers, foreign agents, Western spies, etc. So their main narrative is that civil society organizations, and concrete ones, have money from suspicious sources, Western countries that want to ruin the world or rule the world. And these initiatives do not, they represent us, they don't have money. They are sincere parents and people. So what is the result? We are portrayed as money-driven and sold souls, and they are cost-driven and they are saving souls. When they say we are the parents, we represent the parents, they mean that there are no other parents rather than us. And then they will say, well, the NGOs represent few people, and they represent the people, the nation, the majority. And the term, as was already mentioned, the quiet majority started speaking. Another strategy is mobilizing people based on fear. And, it is a global phenomenon, but less developed countries are even bigger target for conspiracy theories. They use the methodology of conspiracy to impose a possible great threat against common people and their kids. And this is the most vulnerable spot for many of us. And fear and anger are the most valuable emotions for mobilization. So if you start to believe that your kids are under attack by some strangers, then you will do whatever it takes to save them. Another very smart, unfortunately, strategy that they are using is using the already existing paranoia and add something, such as, we all, I think, believe that our kids spend too much time on phones, but they will add, kids spend too much time on their phones where they are brainwashed to become gays and trans. We all know that the government is corrupted, but they will add, it's corrupted by civil society organizations that spread gender ideology. So just using the already existing paranoia and add the anti-gender arguments. So the social media propaganda was mentioned, but have in mind, this is really different than campaigning that most of us civil society organizations are doing, because for them, every day is campaign day. They are everywhere, all the time, all around, posting, commenting, giving lectures, very active. Not only on social media, they mobilize on the street. They are doing protests, asking for referendums, collecting signatures for referendums. And what is really different than us is that they engage in every city. We usually work and usually reach people from the municipalities that we are based in. For example, Skopje. They have their chapters in every city. And the majority, like the strongest wing within this, the strongest actor in this anti-gender movement is the evangelical church. is in North Macedonia, and they have their chapter, they have their church in every city. So it's very easy to mobilize and decentralize their discourses. And as I said, close meetings and letters to political decision makers. So they are present in parliament, ministries, local government, and government. And I said one letter from them is stronger than 10 roundtables, for example, organized by civil society organizations. So why? Again, coming back to the first point, because they represent the people and we represent ourselves. And what I think maybe at the end I will share what we were doing or how we were organizing to respond to this. But I just want to say that what we did at the beginning is to learn from organizations and countries that have similar experience and where to find similar contexts rather than in the Western Balkans and ex-Yugoslavia countries. So we turned to Croatia and we asked help from Croatian activists and feminists. And they gave us a lot of tips and they give us a lot of knowledge on how to understand this movement and how to respond to this movement. So again, as Eva said, solidarity and networking among us and sharing experience is very, very important. And panels such as this are also contributing to us being more vocal and to be more aware of what's going on and have adequate response. So thanks to Lana and her colleagues that were really selflessness, were sharing tips and tricks, and we will continue to work and to support each other.
I think
we could use it back right now because it's amazing what you're doing in Macedonia. So
it's so nice to hear that. And I have to say that we in the South Caucasus will also take a lot from this discussion and share with our partners as well, because a lot of these are extremely relevant to our context as well. There is a comment actually in the chat that's really interesting before we move on to Eva with this question, that there is a point or a reflection about the rather than gender ideology, there's a point about focusing on gender awareness necessity. And Western Balkan countries, and also the ones in South Caucasus, did try for decades to advance in political leadership by excluding women from decision-making. And what did it lead to? Conflicts, wars, and sufferings of all groups and society. And then Lana has responded to this, but I would like to ask you to voice your response before we move on to Eva.
I absolutely agree. And I think that the term, I didn't hear about the term of awareness, gender awareness necessity. I think it's brilliant. But if we use this term, they again will say this is gender ideology. They are the ones using gender ideology, not us, which is actually a crazy thing, because we have found a sociological definition for gender ideology. And gender ideology actually means that you believe that gender stereotypes are natural, biological determined, which is actually the idea that the anti-gender movement is spreading. So this changing of thesis is something that they're actually doing constantly, and which is crazy. If you have any knowledge about gender theories, this is like, for me, sometimes I have a cognitive dissonance in my head because it's just too much contradiction to comprehend. And just, I'm very sorry, but I need to say one more thing, because Irena was talking very important things about how they're working nonstop. The other day, I found out that the Institute for Social Research in Zagreb has one person who is working on the field of gender. And that person has no time to do her own research because she's constantly reviewing research works from anti-gender movement and finding ways to methodologically reject them. So she has been overwhelmed with research by anti-gender movements that are methodologically, in any way, they will not be published because they're not good, but they're attacking hard.
Absolutely, Lana. Thank you for your reflections on this. And moving in terms of strategies, once again, we're moving on to Eva. Historically speaking, I guess, is there a change in the strategies and the way that the anti-gender movements are organizing or have been organizing throughout the years? This is a really interesting point, if there is a change. And in terms of reflections from the 2000s to now, if you could share a few points.
Yeah. It's like $1 million question. I think a lot has already been mentioned, both by Lana and Irena, on the changes that you have seen. And I think I think it is important that we are stating that it is an attack against democracy, so that it's not just something against gender equality. I think when we started to see it more as a movement rather than just people saying, I mean, for a long time, we've seen that, what do you say to discredit women human rights defenders? You say, she is against the family values of our country, she is against the traditional values of our country. So that has been going on for a long time. It's very easy to say, it sounds very good, just as Lana and Irena has said. It sounds like you are standing up for something really important. But there is no definition of what it is. So it's also, you can decide yourself. It's, and usually, I mean, traditions are changing. If they were not changing, women wouldn't have the right to vote, for instance, and things like that. So I mean, you can't really say that, because when you talk about traditional values, they usually go way back in places we have left long time ago, where we actually have the right to inherit and speak for ourselves nowadays, in most places anyway. But I think I could take as an example the Commission of the Status of Women, the CSW, that are held every year in the UN. I know when I was there the first time, that was 2000, and I'm sure it happened even before. Then it was very much focused on against sexual education and against abortion. And there were these well-educated, well-connected already people who met in the morning. If you came early on in the corridors, you saw this group, and then they went and put their anti-abortion propaganda over everything that has to do with women's rights, as a way of just sort of discredit and also get their own stuff out. I would say that they didn't really follow protocol, because that is not important for them. The issue is more important. I think it's also interesting how they are both against sexual education and abortion, because it's kind of, the lack of sexual education would lead to more abortion, need abortion more, but there you are. And I think the right to life has always been there, but they are, as has been mentioned now, more and more taking over the rights-based language, but not in the right way. I also already said that, and I think this is something that we really need to look at. And using this, like Irena said, that they are using an existing paranoia and add something. Transphobia has really been something that they have used very successfully, and that we have seen the change, where now we have people calling themselves feminists from Europe, for instance, suddenly sitting on a panel together with anti-gender movement, because they are together in their transphobia. And I think we need to be better at looking at who is really there, and remember what the end goal is for the anti-gender movement, as have been mentioned. I think they are better and better connected. There has been some research, has been mentioned, trying also to see where the money comes from, and also has been said it's both from oligarchs from Russia and from the conservative religious ones in the US. But there is also some people who see that there are not that many behind the funding and kind of the narrative that they all take on. So I think if we could show what I think Lana said, show that they are a loud minority. And we need to take on also this, what is ordinary people? We've had it here in Sweden as well. It's like a trend to say ordinary people against elite. I think also in the word of where we are living with civil society, I sometimes see the same when you are sort of saying, oh, we shouldn't fund the NGO, the sort of very professional NGOs, but rather the grassroots. What do we mean by that? And is that the same thing that is going on? So I think it's coming everywhere. Yeah, we have said this, discredit some words. I think also what has happened with the sort of rights agenda and standing up for children's rights and the pedophilia and everything that has been mentioned, the anti-gender movement now takes places where women human rights defenders should be on international meetings. And that is something that anyone who are part of the international community needs to be very aware of and needs to fact check who you are inviting. They do have a great narrative sometimes, and if you don't dig deeper, if you're just getting someone saying this is a good person, always check, because now they have been targeted for a long time. International meetings on women's rights, LGBTQI rights, they are always there. Like Irena said, they are campaigning every day and they have the money to do so. They have people who can do that. And that, I think, has come more and more. And finally, I think there is so much now that plays into the hands, and that also shows that they target really democracy in different ways. The rise of populism and nationalism in many, many countries, including EU countries and including my own country, and the narrative around that, it is the same goals that they have, and they are feeding into each other, and the paranoia and the fake news are so many, so people are believing in things that you for a while ago would never have thought that they would believe in. I think the Istanbul Convention, unfortunately, have become a very good tool for them to show how, I don't know how they do it, but they have really used the Istanbul Convention against sort of anything to do with gender, including then gender-based violence. They've always used the basis of religion, although I don't think it's a religion at all, it's power that they are talking about. And I'm just gonna end so that we can go into more sort of what are we doing, and even if we have done that a lot. I think this, that Lana was talking about, that there is a presence from the anti-gender movement in all the school boards. That resonates also a lot. I saw just after the last awful school shooting in the US. Again, there is this sort of urge that teachers should have guns to be able to protect the kids. And there was a teacher who said, we live in a crazy world where I'm supposed to carry a gun to protect the kids in school, but I'm not allowed to choose the books they should read.
Excellent point, and depressingly excellent point. Eva, thank you for sharing. I would, before we move on, and we really don't have a lot of time, I have to admit, but before we move on, I'd like to remind our audience to please post questions in the chat. And there is also a very important and interesting comment there as well that I would like to voice also in terms of engagement and working with men. And it says that most of us men should and must get involved on promoting and supporting gender empowerment in all levels, starting from the kindergarten to above. And there are no other ways. And in the end, we must understand that women's empowerment is about win-win for all of our societies. And this is very, very important point. Obviously, we have had partner organizations and activists who are specifically have a strand specifically working with men through those lenses. And this is an important point to mention. So also now moving on to one of our final panels that will focus on Lana and Irena. To you, and I did ask this previously, and you did also speak about this previously. So then just to reflect on some of these points in terms of how the anti-gender movements have affected you as organizations and activists, and what are some of the resources that you need to be able to be proactive and to be able to claim this agency and to set your own agenda. Because you did mention also earlier that one of the ways that you have been affected is working nonstop. You should not be doing that technically. And then women, human rights defenders and activists very frequently and unfortunately deprioritize their own physical and mental health in sort of being counterpoised with these narratives. And you mentioned also earlier this mental health and psychosocial issues that are very, very important in terms of paying attention to. So again, if you could share a few words about the way that it has been affecting you, which you have said also earlier, and what are some of the resources that you need and how we could support. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Is it for me or Lana?
It's for the both of you. So yes, Irena, since you have the mic, just go. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me start on a personal note and then maybe move to other levels. When it comes to feeling secure, I do feel secure, and just overwhelmed with what is called chronic stress and anxiety. That actually allows me to be functional and not always aware of the state of my mental health. And I think from what I heard, this is a common story for every activist, especially feminist activists. So we need to take care better for ourselves. And I think just being in feminism, being very vocal publicly, it made me, just kind of like I am used to attacks on me, but the worst kind of attacks, it's like my vulnerable spot, is on my motherhood. So some might dismantle these results, but I think for me it is important because in a small country, you feel like everything that is posted against you translates immediately in an offline world. So, for example, I feel insecure to talk on parents' meetings. I think that other parents might excommunicate me and my child will suffer. Then I feel this need to support everything what the teachers and the other parents are saying, never be critical towards that, so that I won't be labeled as a threat for the class. And the reason for this is because I was very connected with this educational reform, and the anti-gender movement has attacked me on this very oftenly. So this is just everyday things that affect me and my family. So what is useful is solidarity from other activists. It doesn't happen very often, since I think people perceive us feminists as strong women that don't need anyone defending them. However, I have witnessed that it makes you feel better if you are publicly defended. We are nice people. We don't engage in commenting stupid things. But I think sometimes it is important to support your sisters publicly. And I say this because even as a movement or as a civil society, when we face anti-gender movements, we immediately were aware that the first thing we need to do is get together and connect. So we started mobilizing and connecting. First, we started offering lectures for civil society organizations, anti-gender movement, just to introduce the organizations with this movement, because prior to this, many were thinking that, oh, these are just parents talking about some concrete issues, etc., etc. Then we started creating joint strategies, and participation with from like-minded people is very important. So no one has ownership. These are our strategies. And then we created joint narratives and key messages. So to be more short, to be more direct, we stop speaking NGO-ish language. So we talk with emotions rather than the cold rational rhetorics or the human rights rhetorics, because in North Macedonia is a different approach. They don't speak their human rights language. They speak, the big anti-gender organizations speak this language in front of, where it's needed, in front of UN mechanisms, etc., etc. With people, they speak with emotions. So for example, I don't say the situation with human rights is deteriorating, etc., but we'll say people are suffering on this, and this level. We created one Facebook group, which we called A Place for All, where we try to build a social base for progressive ideas. And just creating social spaces, I think it is really important. So we really recently created TikTok, Instagrams, and we see that a lot of audience we missed in prior years, because we are boomers and we stay on the social media that we relate to.
Thank you, Irena. This has been absolutely useful. And then Lana, if you could add a few bits from your side.
What we need a break. Okay. I think what Irena said was very important, especially with using the language. It's something crucial. But what I think that we really need is, we are opposing a global movement, talking on panels how to oppose a global movements on our very particular local levels. Don't get me wrong, I love the panels, but we need a global feminist strategical meeting where we can all come, all discuss, and all come up with proactive strategies that we will use, because you cannot oppose a global movement on a local level. It's absurd. You know, you can, but you will always be one step behind, because on an operative level, it's just not sustainable. So what Irena said, solidarity, but we cannot just live solidarity in terms of one country helping another, one civil organization helping another. We really need to make a global movement that we already have. We have a feminist global movement. We have to come together and strategize. And don't get me wrong, but on that strategy meeting, we also need to have some good leisure time, because we are all working 24/7. We are all working in second phase of burnout, if not more. And we also need to feel like what we do is valued. We don't get it by the society, but then we can organize something where we can also not work all the time, but also have a little bit of a break. And also this is important because this leisure time is a time where the best ideas come among people, when people are still networking and mingling, and it's a different setup, you know. So it's also quality for the work that we plan to do, but I really do believe that we need a global strategic planning on our proactive strategies to opposing global rights anti-gender movement, because I do believe we have everything on our side. The science, international documents, logic, argumentation, passion, everything is on our side. We now just need to come together and strategize as a global movement.
Absolutely, Lana. And one thing that many amazing women human rights activists and feminist activists such as yourselves also overlook, but maybe not overlook, but don't mention as much, is needing funds and money to make sure that these issues are reflected in many of the budgets, for instance, that international agencies can support. So this is a really important important point in terms of solidarity. Absolutely, if you'd like to add.
Yes, in terms of budgeting and financing, I mean, this is important, but what I have a problem with is often the financing that we get is often something when the problem has already risen and is recognized, and then there is money inflicted in this problem. It's too late. If you want to spend less money on a problem because being proactive, then you need to listen to women and adjust funding to what they're saying, because they're the ones who are recognizing the trends before the trend becomes a problem. We saw this coming years ago. No one wanted to listen to us. This could have been stopped if people wanted to listen to us, if the people who are donating the money wanted to listen to us. And when we say we need a global strategic meeting, it is also in this sense.
Absolutely, and this is an excellent point in terms of proactivity. And then we only have a few minutes left, but I would like to give the floor to Eva to talk about some of the ways forward and what our strategies could be to reclaim our space in this subject.
I think most have been said. I mean, I agree. I think we need to create safe meeting spaces, and obviously it would be fantastic with a global feminist one, but also regional and whatever, just to have spaces to actually discuss and not discuss counter strategies as much as the strategies forward. Like Lana said, if we ever want to get ahead, we need to create sort of the way forward ourselves and not be totally sort of overwhelmed with just having the counter strategies, answering to what someone else is saying. I think money, I think for us as Kvinna to advocate wherever we are, because there is also, you can really see not only that the anti-gender movement is well funded, but also that women's rights, feminist movement get less and less of the funds. So we need to change that. We had this difficult thing as well with sort of when gender mainstreaming became against women's rights and feminist movement, because everybody could say that they did a little bit of gender mainstreaming. So I think money is really essential. I think also if there are anyone in this listening in from international organizations, to just recognize what Lana said. We need to listen better to know where the money is best placed, but also to learn how to dismantle all these slander campaigns, be a clear voice against that in all conversation that you might have. I think that is important. I think it's important to really show who should be seen as the expert on the topics. It is the women human rights defenders. It is the activists out there who knows the trends, as Lana so well put it, before the trends are even visible. And I think solidarity that has been mentioned is essential, and it's great with the solidarity among the activists, but well, I'm an activist as well, but there are more who needs to show solidarity. And it is, again, I think we need to maybe change the narrative even more and be so clear that this is an attack on human rights, it's an attack on democracy. What kind of society do you want to have? You need to be with us to create a world that would be better for your children and grandchildren.
Excellent, Eva. And I also really hope that we have representatives that would listen to these points. We are really moving towards the end, but if I could take a few more minutes to share a couple of questions that have come in and have been addressed to Lana, and again to Lana and Irena. So the first question is to Lana. When you say that they are attacking liberal democracy, what does that mean in post-Yugoslav context? In Croatia, where liberal democracy or neoliberalism had extremely negative effect on social and economic security and equality, what does that mean for women's organizations? Should they defend liberal democracy? A few words.
As Irena said, I'm also very critical on liberal democracy, and what I'm advocating is participatory democracy. I know we're not yet there, but when we talk about there is a huge problem. You said liberal democracy or neoliberalism. It's not the same. Liberal democracy is a political system. Neoliberalism is an economic system. We cannot understand them as same. So when I say liberal democracy, I mean democracy, okay, it is attached to economic system, but before anything, it is a political system that we in Croatia live since the 90s, and it is the political system of the European Union. And this political system also means values that are core values to European Union, such as equality and the old French, the equality, fraternity, sisterhood, and freedom. These are the core values of political system of liberal democracies. And neoliberalism is something that I will always be critiquing. I have a problem with capitalism, but I also can acknowledge that not everyone has a problem with capitalism, you know, and I don't have a problem if someone in my society is a capitalist or believes in this economic system, but I do have a problem with someone who doesn't believe that we as people are equal, and as we equal deserve the same rights. This is something that I do have a problem with. And when you talk about negative effect on social and economic security, the negative effect, it is the change of the economic system. In Croatia, you don't even have neoliberalism. You have crony capitalism with clientelism and corruption as main observers. And it is in connection with changing the system and all history, but the topic is just too complex to get really into it. In terms of the values of liberal democracy, as I said, the idea of equality, freedom, and sisterhood, I will say, rather than brotherhood. This is something that as a value, I say hello to. Thank you very much. I do believe, although I'm critical to liberal democracies, I do think that this is I don't know, the crown of our civilizations, these ideas.
Absolutely, Lana, thank you. And while the second question is addressed to the both of you, I'd like to ask Irena to answer, because we're super short on time, unfortunately. And the question is, how are you using national narratives and the memory from the 90s in your politics? And do you think that women's movement in the region has the potential to challenge anti-gender politics on these issues?
Okay, so it is, I think, different. It depends on whether, I think the question is whether the anti-gender movement is using the national narratives.
Yes, how they are using national narratives and the memory from the 90s.
I think it depends on, of course, we don't use, I mean, here we don't use national narratives. This is something that we are distant. However, what I usually do, I do use myself the arguments of the reasonable patriotism, and then come to the second part of the question. I love the Balkans. I love Western Balkans. I really like this region, and the reason why I love this region and why I love these countries is not because we are God's chosen or anything, but specifically because of the wonderful feminists and women within this region. And I really believe, and I know that women movement in the region has the potential to challenge the anti-gender politics on these issues. And just because I believe in this, that's why I'm here, and I'm constantly working on this issue and collaborating with sister feminists from around the region. But when they use the national narratives, of course, they skip the 90s. This is the bad period. However, they will, what is the common, just to be very short, what is the place where gender and nationalism meet? On the reproduction. So they will use these arguments. Women are not giving birth to enough children. Our demography is going down. The white flag, no children are born. Women are emancipating, asking for divorces. What is happening? They're ruining the tradition, and etc.
Absolutely. Thank you, Irena. And thank you, Anna. And thank you, Eva. Unfortunately, we do have a few questions still coming in, but unfortunately, we are unable to take them. And we have to close because we also have another panel coming in. I just want to say a few words in terms of, and I don't think this needs to be said pretty much, but it's also essentially looking at the intersectional aspects of this oppression that's advanced by the anti-gender movement, and the fact that this affects women, for instance, women with disabilities, conflict-affected women, displaced women, and LGBTQI women, and women living in remote settings, ethnic and religious minority women, even more, let's say, even though we are not comparing, but it is something that really needs to be incorporated into these strategies as well, to ensure feminist peace and a holistic women, peace and security agenda. And I would really like to thank all three of these magnificent women and human rights defenders and activists, and wish you the best of success and luck in your future endeavors. And I am humbled to be in your presence. Thank you. Moving on to Emilia.
And thank you to you, Ella.
Thank you so much, everyone, from me as well, for this really excellent and very important discussion. But I mean, above all, thank you for all the hard work you're really doing. And maybe just before we close, I'll very shortly restate what has been already said regarding participatory democracy and how it is fundamental to feminist peace. And if human rights defenders and activists cannot speak freely, if they're constantly subjected to threats and attacks, as we heard from you, how can they really work on peace building, and how they can raise all the sensitive issues that are often unpopular, like, for instance, bringing people together from different sides in a conflict situation? But still, I mean, despite all the challenges that the rising anti-gender movement has brought, it's really so empowering to know that women human rights defenders and activists, that you really remain persistent and driven by solidarity to continue promoting democracy and feminist peace. So thank you once again to you. Thank you for everyone who followed this panel. We will now continue with a 25 minutes break, and we come back at 12:30 for the next panel on alternative narratives, feminist peace. Enjoy the short break and looking forward to see you soon.